a brief of me. My name is Hamis Mugendawala, and I head the research and innovation at the National Planning Authority. I did my master's at University College London, and then I did my second master's at Makerere University. My PhD was from the University of Southampton in the United Kingdom. I have been a visiting scholar at Iowa State University in the US, in Iowa State, and as well at the University of Witwatersrand. That is just the brief of myself. I have briefly taught in Makerere, I have briefly taught in Sitema, and I have briefly taught in Chambogo University. So I would say I've been a jack of all trades, but all the same, I started as a classroom teacher actually, before going into planning. I'm going to share my screen. I hope I have the rights to do so. So this is going to be a heavily interactive session, and the moderator is going to help me to preside over the rest of the people whenever there is an activity. I just want to listen to a few people. How do they relate this picture with what they do? What do you think about this picture here in regard to what we are going to talk about today? Can I hear from a few people? John Baptist?
Yes, sure, we can. So members, if you're making a contribution, just unmute yourself and then make your contribution, and then you mute. Thank you. Kayaga, your hand is up.
Thank you so much. When I think about this picture, and in relation to the topic that we're discussing, I wonder where maybe the cork was an egg, and now it has been it has been nurtured to become this cork, and now it's more usable versus the one egg. That is how I perceive the picture.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you, moderator. From what you are going to discuss today, I believe this cork is telling us something about time. For us who have lived in the countryside, we know that the cork is very good in telling the time. And I believe that whatever research we do, and in order for this research to meet the needs, it must be timely so that it's not overcome by time issues. Whatever research we do in usable products must be, we must observe time so that you're not caught up by events. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Hamis, on the chat, Christine Mwevesa is saying the cork is making its presence known, telling the top of the hour or marking its territory. It is saying something that cannot be ignored. And I also associate with that, I think the cork is crowing. It is saying something. If you want to listen to it and pick the message, well and good. If you don't, it has done its work.
Thank you very much, John Baptist. And you can really see the diversity in our thought. And given that we are adults, whatever we say is correct in a context. And I must say that you are right to say that this cork is communicating something. Of course, we don't know to whom it is communicating. We don't know whether it is communicating to fellow corks, like someone said, marking its territory, telling them don't come around, I'm the master of this area. We don't know whether it is telling us time. We don't know whether it is complaining that it has not eaten. And so we can only keep guessing. But the issue here is that it's trying to communicate something whatever it's communicating, we can only guess. As academics, the issue or the most important thing here is for us to communicate whatever we do. The question is, to whom are we communicating? And what is the message we are communicating? Like this call, to people like us, we may not actually exactly tell what it is communicating. Like someone said, it may be communicating time, it could be communicating territory mark, it could be communicating something that we may not even know. Now, as researchers, that is what happens. Sometimes we communicate, but people may think either we are saying something, we may be saying something they don't understand. Like when we present our numbers, formulae, in the methodologies and what, and we exhibit that prowess. We may think we've made it, we've done it, but then the people we are communicating to may see it as trash. So thank you very much for that. This is what we intend to look at today. You know, I like teaching using pictures. Those who may not like it, kindly excuse me, because my professor told me that pictures complete the story more than words. I am going to go back to John Baptist to ask people what they see through this picture and how does it relate to what they do. Thank you, John Baptist.
Yes, members, let's internalize that picture and make a contribution. What do we make of it? Yes, Joy to Asimwe.
Thanks, Chair. What I can see is that evidence is actually thick. There is thick evidence availability, and then the policy is very thin. It is at the bottom, which means maybe it's the foundation of what our society needs. But then it is not benefiting. I think it is malnourished. But these two axle wheels or axles should be enforcing each other, and they are actually not, because one is too heavy and another one is very small and thin. Over there, policy is thin, evidence is thick. So there is a problem here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Asimwe, for that. Members, what do the rest of us see? Yes, Lawrence.
Yeah, I think the policy making process is not aligned to evidence that is available. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Christine is saying there seems to be a lack of synchronization between evidence and the policy process. Hamis, can we go with that for now?
Thank you very much. And I'm so grateful for the conversation. But what you see is a relationship between evidence and policy. Ideally, policy must be driven by evidence. But this is a representation of reality. In reality, we have various scenarios. In scenario A, no, in scenario where the first lever, I think that is A and B, you see that there is a lot of evidence out there at scenario A and B. But then it is informing a very small level of policy making process. So you have too much evidence, But then policy is using just a little of it, or it's driving very limited policy making process. What could this mean? It could either mean that what we call evidence out there is completely irrelevant. And so the policymakers see very small sense in whatever we do. Now, when you look at lever D and C, this is where you see some kind of significant alignment, where you see that proportionate level of evidence is driving a proportionate level of policy making process. And sometimes that would be the aim of the academic. Then you find that at level EF, this is where you have a lot of evidence completely misaligned with the policymaking process, meaning there is zero correlation between evidence out there and the policymaking process. And this is very, very common. There could be various reasons, either the policymaker seeking evidence or the evidence that is there is completely irrelevant. Now, it's up to us to locate ourselves at the different locations. What I told you is that most of the academics would be happy if they are located at point CD, where their evidence drives policy, where there is significant alignment. Okay, still on the communication challenge. John Baptist, can you list some comments about this picture?
Yes, sure. So members, what do we make of this? Of course, for me, being from the communication field, I find this as a miscommunication. There is a lot of evidence. We sometimes see big theses, PhD theses, and then the policymaker is saying, what is your contribution in a sentence or two? What message can we pick from here? So sometimes there is that misalignment where we have a lot of work, but it is not communicated in a summarized, useful way to government and policymakers. Yes, Michael?
Thank you so much, moderator. Between research.
Michael, your line is not clear. Your network is bad. May I request that you type it on the chat instead? Clement, please just type it on the chat. We are not able to hear you. And then Dr. Gad Rosaza says it appears the volumes are too huge and not appealing to the receiver. Alex Thomas, are you making a contribution?
Yes, please. My take on this picture is that the gentleman with the 3 volumes probably represents an academic who has got a lot of this evidence, but he is trying to bring it to the gentleman who is seated and probably an executive or a policymaker
of work
who wants the work summarized, but is not.
I'm actually thinking
somebody also talking. Oh,
the research.
So the gentleman needs to summarize in a way that can be.
John Baptist, I think you have a right to mute someone, please.
Yes, sure. Let me do something about it. Okay, as we handle that, Franklin Higenyi says the lack of a link between the policymakers and the research or researchers, because it is not disseminated in small and well-written booklets. Florence Tagola says too much evidence, but what is the key message? JN says receiver is not interested in the bulk of brilliant information the researcher is presenting. He just needs a few points to guide his decision making. And then Tagola Florence, too much evidence. Dr. Rugaz, okay, he's just talking about our etiquette. Goretti says translating research into logical write-up is not always an easy activity. It involves thinking into the theme of the researcher. He is worked up and thin because of the heavy work done. Eunice Ndiareba, the researcher has a lot of evidence which the policymaker has no time to conceptualize. So unless the researcher brings out the key message, there will be no communication.
Okay,
I think, Hamis, we can proceed with that.
I just love the way people see this, and it's quite a dilemma. And when you look at these two pictures, you see the person with the big books could be an academic or could be a PhD student. And this student, from the look, it's like he has been broken by the work, and he thinks he has put in all that it is required. And is either he's an academic as well, he's taking this to someone, maybe his supervisor or a policymaker like myself. If he's a policymaker, he looks to be a lazy guy, so scared of these voluminous kind of books. And if he's a supervisor, he's as well, we could say he could be lazy, but he may not be lazy. So it's both ways. But the issue here, I was told by my professor on the first day I joined my doctorate. He said, sometimes you may be lucky to get over 20 people reading your big book after doing your PhD. This was really painful to me because you are spending 3, 4, 5, 6 years on a PhD. And after that, you only get a few people opening it after the Viva. But the message here is that all that we write is not necessarily important to those that we write to. And this is how most of them see it. You give them big books, be sure that they may either read the one page or throw it into the trash or just leave it to gather dust. Now, the communication dilemma of academics is such that when you're a researcher, you are expected to provide information. But as well, your role goes beyond just providing information. They expect you to translate it, interpret it, become an intermediary between people, and synthesize it for the policymaker and decision maker to make a decision. Now, that confers a lot of responsibility on the academia. Other fields, the story is different. A lawyer, they will have someone who goes to the field to collect evidence. I don't know whether it's called a prosecutor or something. They will bring it. The lawyer will interpret it. and someone will argue it in court, and another one will take decision. So you see that there is a lot of specialization and division of labor in other professions. For the academic, the expectation is too much that he's supposed to go to the field. The same academic is supposed to crunch the numbers, make, interpret, translate, ensure that he gets fodder to get to the policymaker. But for the others, another person collects the evidence, another one interprets the evidence, another one will argue it, and then another person will take. So this is to make you, the academics, understand the responsibility that you do have, that it goes beyond the responsibilities of other careers or other occupations. And so, in conclusion on this, you are carrying a bigger load. So, a lot of people, especially in the academia, because I've been there, they think it's just a big bother. Or when someone does his research, they think that is the end and they've done it. They published a book. And the question is, why do we spend all our time doing research? Is it for our own sake? Is it for us to keep jobs? Is it for us to publish and not perish? Is it for us to show our prowess in crunching complex algorithms? Is it for us to use to show how we can use complex methods? Sometimes when you're in the academia, you may get so dissolved into the above, but that is not the case. Rather, the research that we are trying to do should offer solutions. But sometimes in the due course, we individually benefit. You may get a stipend, you may get some grant monies, but what you're trying to do is to provide a solution to a certain problem that you have identified. And so we are advocating for this paradigm shift in research, where it should contribute to or end up into a solution. And whenever you're doing, even when you're doing your PhD, you know, the PhD level has the highest mortality rate. So many students drop out. And when you look at university rankings in terms of PhD graduation, you may find that the highest ranking could be maybe 60% or 50% or just slightly above that. But what does that mean? It means that, among others, PhD students come excited with, sometimes they come with topics that they're interested in, but sometimes they may take on a topic because there is funding, and as they move on, they no longer see the importance, or they no longer see the value of what they are doing. They get depressed and then drop out because they don't see the end of their thesis providing a solution. Now, what does this mean? It means that when you're in the academia, you must break out of that bubble. Sometimes it's a very interesting bubble and very comfortable sometimes, because when you're in the academia, you can say anything, you can research on anything, you can give any recommendations. Now, us in policy making, we are so much gagged up. Why? because you are only supposed to make recommendations of what has worked and what you think works. Anything else remains academic. And you don't want to continue being referred to as that is academic, because academics should inform policy. So whenever you are coming up with policy recommendations, you ask yourself, does it work? Where has it worked? Will it work here in the context? If it doesn't, it will be a waste of time. And that is why you present your paper, take it to a policymaker, and then it throws it away. And that's what you don't want. But what does it mean? It means that the policymaker has already looked through, and in the context, it doesn't work. For example, if someone gave a recommendation based on the evidence that maybe boarding schools perform better than sometimes day schools because of the challenges day scholars go through. Maybe you may say that evidence shows that teachers who teach in boarding schools are always present in class compared to those who teach in day schools. And therefore the recommendation is that every school should be a boarding school. Now, within the context of Uganda, that will not work, because boarding schools have a marked up fees, and you know that a lot of parents are poor. Now, your recommendation is a little bit it's connected to the evidence, but it's aloof, it's out of touch with the reality. And so what we need to do is to break out of that academic bubble and effectively communicate and engage the users. Because when you engage them, you start toning down, you start realigning your messages to the existing realities. Now, that is why I'm saying that bottom line, better research communication is a must for any researcher. I want us to reflect on what we've been saying, and as well look at this message, this picture here, and tell me some of the messages that come through your mind. Over to you, John Baptist.
Thank you, Hamis. Yes, members, the intersection is in the middle there, and that's the relevance. We see on the left what you want to say, and on the right, what they are interested in. So how do we create that synergy, and what do we make of this picture? Any contributions, good people? Yes, Alex?
Yes, thank you. I think what this means is that what people want to say is not necessarily always what the listeners are interested in. What you might say is only partly addressing what the listeners want to hear. And John, if I may go back a little bit on the academic bubble issue, I wanted to ask the presenter the question that putting the responsibility of making research evidence available to policymakers of what they have might be too much of a responsibility being put on the academics. Because if you look at the payoff, an academic is probably looking for the degree, the promotion at the academic institution. But to task them with the responsibility of making this research, their research, available for policymakers in a way that they can consume and take it up, there's no direct reward for them. And I think there's what you might call a market failure there. There's no direct benefit for me to struggle and convert my PhD into a usable form for the policymaker. So I think that's that gray area there. So we might be putting the responsibility on the academics when they really don't see any reward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex, for that contribution. Hamis, if you can just note the question down, we'll discuss that in the comments so that we don't interrupt your presentation. But he asked the question of how do we benefit by making this simpler for the policymaker. Franklin?
Thank you so much, John. And thanks, Dr. Hamis, for really highlighting the importance of academia to policymakers. As a PhD student, I struggle with, trying to make sure that my research is going to be relevant and can be actually uptaken by policymakers. And Dr. Hamis has really mentioned something about the fact that sometimes we become so emboldened in that academia bubble where you make your recommendation and the fact that of course you want to complete your PhD, you don't sometimes think about recommendations that probably have been made outside in other countries that can be taken up by your country, because at the end of the day you're looking for that niche, that thing, that idea that is going to make your your PhD important at that particular moment. So as the previous speaker has spoken, how do we strike a balance between giving them what they want, but also bringing on board what we feel is important and relevant at that particular moment? Thank you.
Okay, very interesting.
Okay,
Now,
interesting discussion.
John Baptist,
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Much, Dr. Hamis, for the presentation. The picture really tells me that we need
Sorry, Scholastica, we seem to have missed you. I think it's your network. You can just type your contribution to the chat. But Dr. Hamis, on the chat, there are still interesting things. Goreti Naga says it shows there is very minimum link, so researchers seem to be alone and policymakers alone. There is need to focus for focus integration between the two. Juliet says researchers need to move from comfort zones and learn the art of communicating to government. The researcher has to be relevant to policy making. Kadrin says we may need to consider the policymakers and the agenda so that we can align and package our policy recommendations into a form that the policymakers find relevant. Yes, Namawak element research needs to be aligned with given plans. I think, Hamis, you can take it on from there.
Okay, thank you very much, members, for the very interesting discussion, and I really I'm enjoying it. You see, when you look at this picture, if you're a psychologist and just ignore what the text and the what, just look at these two people up there. the person communicating is really happy. He thinks or she thinks she has it all. She's telling something so important. On the other hand, this guy who might be a government bureaucrat like myself, or is a policymaker, he's seeing shit. And the way he looks, he's like he's not even interested in listening, while the other guy is really taking this opportunity as something that is from heaven. You really see the vigor this young man, this young lady, maybe is telling this fellow about his PhD topic, or is telling Hamis from National Planning Authority about the findings of this study. But then when you look at what this fellow, a government bureaucrat or a supervisor or someone in the private sector requires, and what this person is saying, there is very little communality. Very little communality. Now, what does that mean? It means that we must work to see that these two circles keep intersecting and we increase on the intersection. What I must say is that it will be unrealistic. It will be very unrealistic to think that the two circles can perfectly intersect. Why? Because the people who produce research sometimes are different from the people who use it. And so that brings in some kind of divergence in thought. Now, the way we can increase on the intersection is to keep engaging with each other right from the start. During my PhD, myself, I was lucky because I had a very big, scholarship from the British government, which allowed me to start working with the community on my PhD. So I would always fly to Uganda, go to the communities at every level of my PhD. So I went with these big questions when I went to Southampton. I want to discover this. This is what I want to find out. But whenever I would go to the communities, I kept on turning, and the situation was quite very humbling for me. And I started realigning my questions to the realities that were before me. And that partly answers the question of trying to create that balance between what the reality wants to hear, or what the reality wants, and what we, the people who are trying to produce research, want to communicate. Actually, take this, I want to use an analogy. I believe most of us are above 18 years, and you know very well, if you want to fall in love, you do not want the intersection point to be quite small. I'm connected. So what you're looking at is to convince the other person that you are the best. And a researcher, in most cases, I would take a researcher, whether you're female or male, I would take you to be the man who is interested in falling in love with a lady. You start dressing up in a certain way, you start liking the games the other person plays. You start convincing them to go out with them. So what you're trying to look at is the meeting point to increase, the level of intersection, to see that you begin thinking alike, not perfectly the same. You need to note that, but at least the level of intersection to be bigger than the time you met. So that is why you cannot ignore the issue of trying to strike the balance, because someone said, but it doesn't pay. It doesn't pay, and it's so much a bother. But what is the essence of spending a lot of time burning candles, burning hours to do a certain piece of work only to gather dust? It's so painful. And so I want you to take it just like that analogy of a young man looking for love or looking for this beautiful girl. You cannot say to hell with it. No, because as a human being, you need to function. So as an academic, you need to function. And how do you show functionality? When your products are always bought off the shelf. And so it's quite very, very important. I want to go to another slide, and this is what we are making of what is coming from what we've talked about. That when you are an academic and you want to communicate what you found out, you need to know your audience. Am I going to communicate to fellow academics? Because when you are in the bubble, just like Franklin said, you are used to certain jargons, you are used to certain way of presentation, you are used. But remember, if you are going to meet policy makers, or if you are going to meet executives, it's a different ball game. It's a completely different ball game. An executive, like you're going to meet the PS, Minister of Education, you're going to meet the PS, Minister of Trade. He has 1,000 meetings. You cannot hold them for 3 hours to present to them. Maximum 5 minutes. And it's you now to know how to package. While when you're going for a conference, they may give you maybe 20 minutes. And people are of a certain aptitude in the area that you are presenting in. And so it's very, very important to know your audience. And I use the analogy of a party. Every party has an audience. It has a dress code and it has a communication style. If you are going for a party of, now I will use an example of the Baganda culture and the Basoga culture. When a woman gives birth to twins, and there are some cultural kind of functions that have to be undertaken. Even the language they use on certain occasions when they are performing those functions, you cannot use such a language when you've gone for an introduction, when you are introducing your wife or your wife to be. In fact, if you used the other language at the function of introduce, when you are being introduced to the parents of your wife to be, people may run away. The same thing with the dressing code. When you're going for a dance, when you're going to the beach, the dressing code is completely different from when you are going for a job interview. And so it's the same with the research. The way you communicate to a policymaker, the way you communicate to the chief executive of MTN, the way you communicate to the chief executive of Stanbic Bank is completely different from the way you are communicating to a fellow researcher. Completely different. And you need to know that. Now, your research will always likely to be translated into policy only if it is targeted to the right audience. And in this case, we are talking about government or advocacy agencies. And such categories of audience are usually not academics. Myself, I've been partly an academic, but sometimes when you go into policy, you tend to, and you've ever been in the academics, you tend to understand the weaknesses of each side. Now, you realize that people in policy, where I am, are less, they have less appetite and time for those voluminous, jargon-laden documents. I don't know why, but from my side, I think that in most cases, on our side, you have so many things that require quick policy decisions. And sometimes you may not have time to sift through those hundreds and hundreds of pages. And so the policy audience will always look for synthesized, already translated and repackaged meaningful formats of evidence in order to act. So you are telling them, I studied this is what I found, this is what I think we need to do. Some of you who have participated, I don't know that you've ever participated in the 3-minute thesis competition. It's a world competition that originated from Australia. When I was at Southampton, I participated, but it's quite a very useful a competition. It's called 3T, 3 minutes. It's called 3MT, 3 minutes thesis. They give you a scenario and they ask you that, supposing you met a busy executive in the lift and he only has 3 minutes for you to pitch your thesis, and you're asking them to fund it, how will you do it? Because remember, the moment the lift gets to where this executive is going, he's going to go out, and maybe by then you would not have finished pitching your PhD and you would lose out on the funding. And so we were encouraged and sometimes trained on how you can pitch your PhD within only 3 minutes and you've completed the story. I encourage PhD students to begin that kind of arrangement in your communities. How can you tell someone a complete story of your PhD within 3 minutes? It takes a lot of practice, but it helps to cut out all the and just focus on what is required. Now, today we are talking about research products and formats that policymakers like me and other executives in the private sector, the way you can format your research products. Now, sometimes you may just crop out your abstract and send it to someone where you are just teasing out a few things in your study to interest people to read more. That is an abstract. Or you may decide to say, okay, this is the entire research I did, but let me just send out a summary, which is an overview of the entire research. Now, the difference between an abstract and a summary, the summary is a standalone document to the extent that if I read it, I may not need to read the entire study. It is a standalone and it gives me the key things that are in the entire in the report. While the abstract, it just gives me a small tip to seduce me, sorry for using that word, to read more. I used to hear people who sell liquor and waragi, they would say, give me jaribu. So I would call an abstract a jaribu, that someone is giving you something very small to entice you and say, oh, yeah, I need more. That's an abstract. Sometimes you may do just oral presentations, like at National Planning Authority. We always encourage people with ideas to come and make presentations to us. We do it every Wednesday afternoon. Or you may just do your poster and put it somewhere where you want people to see. Sometimes you may just say, I'm doing a research paper and I will just send it that way. Sometimes you may just condense everything into a press release, or you may decide to chronicle your study into comparing stories, or you may decide to do a policy brief. Now, the choice of any of the above is dependent on you, the author, and the general objective and the target audience. It doesn't mean that every research is going to end up in a policy brief, every research is going to end up in a poster, every research is going to end up in this and that. No, it depends on what you want to get out of your translation of your research product and the audience that you are targeting. So today I want us to focus on something that is so dear to us. Makerere University now, given that they've been receiving government funding for research, the Research and Innovation Fund, they've been working with National Planning Authority in supporting staff in Makerere on how to translate their research in policy briefs. Of course, there are other formats, but we've not looked at them. What the Vice Chancellor asked the National Planning Authority to do is to support the staff in translating the research they've done into policy briefs such that they can be given to policymakers in government. And that's what we've been doing. Now, I think that this is a product that you could be interested in, that as you work on your thesis, as you work on your research, as you work, or you already have your research products ready, but you want to break them into certain products that can be consumed, a policy brief could be one of them. John Baptiste, I'm requesting for a 1-minute health break, and then I get back to you.
Well, that's okay. That is fine.
Yeah.
Members, we can also relax a little bit for a minute or two. We prepare our questions. It is good to keep healthy.
So I was just introducing you to a product that is quite becoming popular to academics, because this is the bridge that is linking them to the policy makers through a brief out of their research. So I must say that majority of our research papers have a section on policy implications. And if you realize this is the most brief area, ironically, because we do research such that we can inform policy, but the policy implications is the smallest. While you have like 50 pages of literature review, 20 pages of methods, 5 pages of conceptual framework, what the result is given the smallest space, that is policy implication. Sometimes someone may just put around either 6 lines and they do. So, but the policymaker does not have time to sift through the other side and sometimes even find where policy implications are, because you even hide them. And sometimes the policy options may not be ready for uptake as is within the paper. And this is where the policy briefs actually come in handy. And so I was looking at a definition by FAO, which caught my attention, that a policy brief is a concise summary of a particular issue, the policy options to deal with it, and the recommendations on the best option. So you've done a research. So you're saying the issue I've diagnosed is this. These are the policy options I have in dealing with it using the evidence that you got. And when I look at the options I've gotten, I recommend this as the best option. To the policymaker, that's enough. And it's always aimed at government policymaker. Because
you members hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So as we wait for Dr. Mugendawala to return, I think we need to reflect on our research, on the work we are doing, and if we are meeting some of these requirements that he's sharing with us on how we can influence policy. But we also need to prepare our questions in case we have any questions or comments that we'll be sharing in a few minutes from now. And Lois, if you can just help and get in touch with Dr. Mugendawala.
John Baptist, I think there is a proposal by the participants could feel free to give insights so that we are not, we use this time profitably. I personally liked the issue of the 3-minute presentation, which is the not a very fast lift. It used also to be called a 3-minute lift meeting. If you met a chief executive of an organization, if you met one of the most powerful persons on earth, you want them to support you. What is it that you would say in 3 minutes? So there is that proposal that we could use this time as we wait.
Thank you, Dr. Ruzaza. I saw participants on the chat raising the same opinion. I think it's a good idea, and not just for policy implementation and defense of the thesis, but also for the early career researchers. For example, when PhD students are writing their proposals, to summarize the proposal in 3 minutes and share. So we could have organized a session like this and say, today we are just talking to our students who are starting their PhD journey, and then they share with us for 2-3 minutes, and then we are able to guide them. It helps us to understand our work, but also the skill of summarizing the key issues in our work. So members, let's share on this as we wait for the presenter to join us.
Yeah, and furthermore, as someone else raises an issue, we also teach this to undergraduate students when we talk about how to make a request, how to make an effective request. It should also be brief, succinct, and precise. It's also a same skill that one applies when they are writing a research problem. Idea research problem that can be summarized in one sentence, that is really the problem. They usually, it's said, it's asked that please summarize your research problem in one sentence. And then the others are explanations of the problem. Okay, let's go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so members of the participants, what do you think about this? And if there are any other insights from what Dr. Mugendawala has discussed so far? Any take homes, any lessons learned, any action points? How are we going to implement some of the skills and the ideas here shared?
Thank you very much. The issue of lack time, like policymakers actually have limited time. They are so busy. I noted that the lack of time or time inefficiency also maybe is partly responsible for the link between researchers and policymakers. Actually, it is true. I appreciate the 3-minute lift, the 3-minute explanation of my research. However, in this, like from the other image we saw, the way we noted the policymaker and the person with his heavy work, to me, I really humbly request the policymakers to give some extra more time to the researchers so that they can explain their work a bit more extensively. So they should give us more time. But again, more time can come along in a way when like researchers are maybe organized in an organized group like NEMRA, well structured, they have their focus, they know their rights, and they have a proper way of approaching the policymakers. So in one way or another, actually, that's what I picked from the presenter. But individual to individual, in most cases, there may be no time. Like this important person is now giving us, may give us even more than 2 hours because we are organized. Again, okay,
yes,
the second point has gone out of my mind. I will be back. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Franklin's hand is up, but of course, Goretti, sometimes it is difficult for some of these officials to give us enough time, as you said, because if you go to a PS's office, for example, you get the PS is telling you, I have to write this report for the minister, I have to present this to the president, I have a cabinet meeting, I have to appear in parliament, there is the budget to conclude, the IGG is asking this question, there is heading procurement. And so it's not just that they sometimes don't like us and they don't like to listen to us, but the kind of environment in which they are working. So yes, it's good to lobby and try to push them, but we also need to prepare ourselves to provide summarized information from our research, the key messages from what we have done, and the key take homes and proposals, because the enough time might not be there. Yes, Franklin.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. For me, my actually key take home is that the policymakers are willing to listen as long as we make our work easily understandable and accessible to them. For me, that's what I've truly got from what Dr. Hamis is saying. But also something that probably NEMRA should think about is to teach us or to help us learn the art of negotiation. Because when I was listening to Dr. Hamis, yes, they want to work with us, but you know, there are those negotiations. For instance, according to some corridor rumors I had about the money that was given to Makerere, negotiation was part of it. So how do we learn how to negotiate and get our way into, into these people's, workspace? For
Yes,
me,
yes.
that's I'm trying to really understand. And if NEMRA can teach us these soft skills, especially the art of negotiation, it is something that we need as researchers, whether in our workplace or you want to get new opportunities, because when you do research, it doesn't mean that you're going to end up in a school or in a university and that is it. No, you can have impact outside that. So I think we need to understand that. Yeah. Thank you so much, John.
You're welcome. Welcome back, Hamis. NEMRA, yes, there is a task on our hand. That bit of the 3-minute agenda, but also the aspect of negotiation. Sometimes you meet PhD people who look at these policymakers. Unfortunately, some of them are failed politicians and things like that, and some have not gone far in school. So someone comes with his doctor of philosophy and saying, now this man really, why should I be explaining myself to these peers who had contested to be MP and they failed and now he's here. But Hamis, we're just having a conversation and the reflections on your discussion so far. It is good to have you back. I don't know how many more minutes you need to finish your presentation so that we can have some kind of conversation, question and answer and reflection before we sign off.
I think within 15 minutes I'll be done.
Great, thank you. Take it on.
I am very sorry about what happened. I use the MiFi, so I've not been tracking data usage. So all of a sudden, it just shut me up. But I was just trying to introduce the issue of a policy brief. And I said that not everything will end up into a policy brief, but when you decide to develop a policy brief, you need to understand two things. Is it an advocacy tool, mostly written by development partners like Plan International, UNICEF, or are you putting information before the policymaker for him or her to take decision? The write-ups will be different depending on the objective. If it is advocacy, an advocacy brief is already biased and it's in favor of a particular course of action. So there are no options for debate. It just says either family planning is the way to go to keep maybe for a country to develop, or we should roll out universal secondary education to increase enrollment of girls in school. So it's already biased. It has taken a side. It has one side. But an objective policy brief is the one where you're saying, this is what I found out. These are the options available, and this is my recommendation. So bottom line, any type of policy brief requires an action, actually. It's not important to write a policy brief if you do not require, if you're not asking for an action arising from what you've written. So you do this by giving enough background information, convincing the reader that something is at stake that requires urgent action, and providing well-articulated alternative options and motivating the reader to take action. There are norms, actually, of policy briefs. They are very short and concise. They are mostly between 1 to 4 pages. After this lesson, I encourage you to just peruse. I might send you some policy briefs that I found. But this is not cast in stone. The page shouldn't go beyond 4 pages. The issue here, make decisions, they are and they only carry meaning. The target audience is not the academia, and they carry applicable recommendations. So the general structuring is such that you will have a title that is quite short, catchy, and the point. It is highly inviting to the reader, and it should be on really a hot topic or a cruel challenge, but illuminating hope for a solution. And I just applaud the media. They are very good at this in the way they choose the title. So your brief will have a title. Now, the title does not necessarily need to be the title of your research. It could be, the title could be just a crop out of your research. Maybe a key finding can even be the title for your policy brief, because you are not using your policy brief to offload the entire research to the policymaker. Rather, you are looking at one aspect of your research and broadening it and cropping out a policy brief. So don't get glued to making the title of your research necessarily becoming the title of your policy brief. No. Sometimes it can, but in most cases it's not. So you have the title, then you have the policy message or the summary. Don't use the word abstract on a policy brief. It's not recommended. Rather, we either use the key messages, the policy message, the summary, and in most cases, this is put in a box or in a bigger type or in a different color, or it's just a few bullets of take-home messages. So from the title, you just hit the key policy messages before you now have the other write-ups, to the extent that even if the policymaker read the first page, you have done all that it takes to make him understand the message. Now, it is after those two that you will go to your introduction or your context or your background, or you may call overview. And this is where you are actually just stating the issue that you are talking about in that brief. In most cases, the structure is that the first statement will hit the issue, then the second will hit the context, where you are explaining the manifestation of the issue, who is involved, who are the aggressors of the issue, who are the victims, if any, then the causes of the situation with evidence, and the effects of the situation with examples. Immediately after that context, you are giving the results, or you are briefly talking about the research. Sometimes you may talk about your research and the methods that you used, but in just not many sentences. And you may separate the research from the results. Sometimes you may find people combining all, just having a sentence: research, results, and conclusions. And here, this is where you are briefly talking about the issue studied and the data. When I say brief, these are like 2-3 sentences. You will read some policy briefs and understand this. So you are subdividing the findings into several subheadings to be discussed, and you are keeping the paragraphs very short and to a single idea. I must say that policy briefs have several subheadings, and you're allowed to use very many subheadings than your original research. And you need to take care of tailoring the findings to the audience interests, and remember to base your conclusions on results. This is sometimes a big problem with younger researchers, where this young person does very wonderful research with great findings, but then when it comes to conclusions, they are totally misaligned to the results of this study. Now, when you have told us what you did, the data you used, and the results or the key findings, you are now coming to the options, the policy options after the results, because what you wanted was to generate evidence. Now you have the evidence. Now it is informing the current policy, the policy options. Sometimes you may want to show awareness of the current policy terrain that has been tried to address the issue under the study, and providing a critique on it. You may focus on why and where the changes need to occur. Most important part of the policy brief is this: the policy implications or the recommendations. After all of the above, you are saying you recommend as follows. And we are saying that you must state clearly what should happen next, flowing from your conclusions and evidence. And the research evidence might support changes either in the law or in the policies or in the regulations, agency funding priorities, organizational practices. So the recommendations must be on a policy issue. The challenge we do have is that people give very weak policy recommendations when they have very strong evidence to go for a critical policy change. A policy issue means that either the existing policies and laws are weak, there are gaps in them, and so your evidence calls for the strengthening or changes within the policy, or your evidence tells you that there is completely no policy, there is no law, there is nothing in place, and so using your evidence, you are suggesting that something comes into place. That is a policy issue. Or that what is in place is obsolete, it should be repealed. So what we call a policy issue, it should be calling for something to be put in place, not just putting passive statements as policy recommendations. And after suggesting the policy recommendation, you need to indicate what will happen after doing what you've suggested to do. Because as a policymaker, I want to understand that, okay, if we say that to improve on teacher presence in school, we should build teacher houses, you should tell me what will be the change in teacher absenteeism when we do what you are telling us to do. Or if we decide to say that we should at least make every health center to have family planning services, I want to know what will be the result? What will be the change if government decided to take up your recommendation? Because it is key. And in most cases, the illustrations and examples that you want to put up to back up your recommendation are put in boxes to illustrate. A box in a policy brief means that I don't want to interrupt the flow of my main text, but I also want you to be informed of this. So you put it in a box to show that it's not part of the text flow. And you always see those things. Sometimes they are sidebars, sometimes they are, so you will see those condiments. And you need to just remember a few things when you are doing policy implications and recommendations. We use action verbs where you're saying develop, put this in place. That is the language of policy recommendations. And in most cases, we ask you to reserve your long list and just take up the fundamental key policy recommendations from the long list. They are those that you think if you decided to put them into place, others collapse. I will give you an example. We realized that just keeping girls in school for 11 years, it makes you collapse most of the interventions of keeping the population healthy. It collapses the interventions for teenage pregnancies. It makes most of the challenges that we face collapse. Now, that is a high impact recommendation. And that is the way you should think from your very long recommendation. There are those that will hit multiple birds. So those are the ones that you need to take. And please don't dream, keep them in touch with reality, because no one is interested in things that can't be implemented. And within the political, economic, and socioeconomic realm of life. As we turn towards the end, you need to, I don't know what I can use here, but policy briefs are quite attractive. In fact, if you just decide to sift through policy briefs when you get your free time, you'll find that they make them look so attractive. And these, I call them condiments. Like when you are preparing your meal, when you're bringing your onions, your garlic, your what, these are condiments, and these make up the policy brief. And I always say, give your policy brief a sexy look. Exploit the use of boxes, sidebars to present your various information, which you don't want to be part of the flow of the text. Like definitions, cases, lists, examples, all of those are put in sidebars or in boxes. And we encourage you to use graphics, photos, use diagrams, maps, pictures, use colored graphics. Remember that readers often look at graphics before reading the text. And they remember to always reference. But the way we reference, you will see that policy briefs carry a very small section of acknowledgement or citation. They may cite either one or two fundamental works that were read or that are so fundamental to the brief, and some kind of details of the author within those 4 pages. So it requires a very critical kind of thought. And lastly, remember that the practice is always different from the theory. This is what I have seen during my experience of writing policy briefs, but your experience could be different. So don't always say, no, we were told that this is the structure. You may find that some institutions skip a lot of what we have talked about, but here I just gave a general outlay. So the practice could be different depending on institution kind of preferences. And remember that not all policy briefs subscribe to the above structure. It's upon the writer's discretion and intention. And it takes practice to write a good policy brief. And seminars like this do not make us experts, but they ignite our inner fire to start. And I just want to encourage you to just start doing it. If you have some work you've done, just decide, say, I want to develop a policy brief out of this work. Write it in any way and send it to me or send it to your supervisor. NPA is supporting academics. We are now winding up with Makerere University, and then we will pick on other institutions. Why we started with Makerere is that because their vice chancellor asked National Planning Authority when we went there during the presentation of their PhD study, and that's why we started with Makerere University. This is the practicum exercise that I will want you to do. You will check out policy briefs, provide a critique to the structural elements, comment on how each policy brief has managed to exploit the condiments that make up an attractive policy brief. And thereafter, you may take out any of your pieces of research and write a policy brief. You may need to share with your peers, or you can share with NPA, or you can share with any person from whom you want a critique to your work. These are some of the references I've used in the preparation of this sharing with you. And I thank you very much for this opportunity. Sorry, I've taken longer than expected, but anyway, thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Hamis Mugendawala, for not just the insights, but also the practical bits of how we can exactly get down to these issues and ensure that a policy works out. And also for the assignments. Members, participants, please do the assignment. Being a teacher, I know how bad it feels for you to teach, give an assignment, and people don't do it. Okay, now we are moving into our discussion session, which should take us about 15 minutes. So we just want to clarify on areas that were not clear, ask some specific questions, share a comment or an experience so that we can learn from one another. And Dr. Mugendawala, there were a few questions that came in already. The first was from Asimwe Joy, who asked, how did you get access to the policymakers when you were doing your PhD? And she added and said, some of them do not like us researchers, some of them have ego, some of them are so busy, some of them are pretending to be busy. So she just wants you to share your experience. Then Dixon asked, what is included in a press release that may not be necessarily in a policy brief or vice versa? That's the question that came in from Dixon. Then there was an earlier question from Alex when he was answering one of the questions that you asked. Then Chibuka Mohammed says, thank you, Dr. Hamis. Kindly, can you share with us the presentation? I think he will liaise with Lois of NEMRA, and she should be able to share this with the participants. Okay, so members, can we now have a conversation, some questions, comments? Scholastica?
Yes, thank you very much. The other time I was disconnected. I want to appreciate the presentation. It's very relevant. And I think one important thing is that as I do my research and I want to communicate to people who are interested, I've got to learn ways of getting to know what people are interested in so that I don't present something that is not going to be read and will gather dust. Very important for me. And I also appreciate the guidelines that we have been given for writing policy briefs, but what is important is for us to practice. And I think that is the take home on top of what other people talked about. Thank you very much.
It's great.
You're welcome,
Thank
Scholar.
you, Scholastica. Yes, members, any other comment, any other question? For me, Hamis, the question is on, we've talked about after the research. What about before the research? What can be done before, especially in regard to supporting your research? Sometimes you're thinking of a research project in an area where there's an organization that is working around it, and then you do not want to wait for the findings before you get to a policy brief. You want them to get to support you as you're starting your research and going out to do the research, so that what you find out is joint and is credible. Sometimes because of resources, you find that we do limited work. How can we get these organizations to actually support us before? And then Franklin?
Thanks so much, John, for moderating. And I want to thank Dr. Hamis for really highlighting the relationship between policy or people who are implementers and us who are, doing the research. For me, my take home today has actually been that the policymakers are people like us. And as John, you had highlighted that, of course, some may not be as, qualified as we are, but they want to understand and appreciate. So for me, I'm thinking that we are supposed to review the way we write, the way we write our work. Then also the fact, I talked about negotiation, and for me that is really coming out now, because yes, we are going to meet them in conferences. Probably some of us are working with them, so we know. But how we transform some of these beautiful things, to make our country better, it's the most important thing that we should understand. Then I would also like to thank Doctor for actually showing us how it's done, how a policy brief is done, the 4 pages or more, depending of course on the organization. But my question is to him, how do we as academicians, for instance, access the policymakers? I mean, you might find someone is in academia, but strictly in academia, so they don't know how to go around, getting access to the policymakers. Not necessarily to, give them the policy brief immediately, but also appreciate, their take on some of these issues. Yes, I might be, for instance, researching on female doctors in Uganda about their career progression, but how do I, for instance, access the PS and all these other commissioners in the ministry, so that I appreciate what is it that they want that can come out, that I can also include in my research. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Franklin. I think, Hamis, you should deal with those. Okay, let's just take Lois as the last one. And then in case there are any other after your presentation, we will see if time allows. Yes, Lois.
Thank you, JB, and thank you, Dr. Hamis. I just wanted to drum up Franklin's question. I think, Dr. Hamis, you have mentioned to us about writing a PEC paper and engaging the cabinet. You've done this, and NPA is doing something like this. Maybe if you share that, that might answer the question of how can the researcher reach out to the PS or the minister? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, members. Of course, there was the first question when we were still doing the presentation. I've forgotten the name, but there is someone who said that he doesn't see direct benefit of converting his PhD into other products for policymakers, because it's a lot of responsibility and it confers a lot of expectation on the academic. I agree with you, it's a lot of expectation. And by the way, the academia does a lot of sacrifice than any other sector. Just look at publishing. We publish free. We publish for free. We share knowledge for free, by the way. And the publishing companies sell our material. Sometimes they may give you something, but sometimes, in most cases, they don't. All that they do is to give you a platform. That's a lot of sacrifice. No other sectors do that. Now, because of those inherent kind of characteristics of our occupation, we cannot run away from them. I would just say that you cannot run away from being a man because a lot of girls have turned you down. No. The issue is that you need to function as expected. You're a man in most cases at a certain age, you will be expected to have a family. And so you have to go through the trials and tribulations. It's part of it. So it is painful for you to do research and no one is bothered about your findings. It brings joy to you even when you've not received any monetary benefits. But if you've been given a platform by a policymaker to listen to your findings, and sometimes giving you hope that what you are doing is relevant and it may be taken further. That is how I look at that. Another person asked, how do we access the policymakers? And I was asked to share my experience. You see, when I joined the University of Southampton, the United Kingdom had shifted the paradigm of PhD. Actually, the PhD in England has really, really changed because they are no longer interested in you just bringing out publications. But how much you engage with the community, with the business community, with the policymakers matters a lot to your PhD. And that is why every year we were asked to produce a statement of impact as a PhD student. You were supposed, in fact, it was a milestone. You were not allowed to proceed without that annual statement of impact. And the statement of impact, for example, if someone was doing research in education, how much are you engaging with the education community, with the education sector? How many schools are you working with? How many, are you meeting teachers to inform them of what you're doing? If you're a social worker, which villages? It did not mean that you needed to restrict your impact in the United Kingdom. No, you were allowed to go back home in the communities, start engaging with them. If you are working on an IT application, which business executives, which business people, which small businesses, which vulnerable groups are you engaging? And how are they also informing your process such that you don't come out and the reality is completely different? So it was a highly integrated kind of process that you were in school, but most of the time you were also spending it engaging with the world of work, the world of business. And this is something that we want our universities to put emphasis on. Keep PhD students less in the institutions and require them to go into the world of work, the world of policy, the world of community, to engage. Let them go to Karamoja, let them go to Busoga, let them go to Buked, let them go to Telso, let them go to Chigezi, let them go to local governments, let them go all over and engage. Now, how do you get in touch with policymakers? Of course, there are quite different experiences, but one way is that policymakers, they're gatekeepers to policymakers. They're gatekeepers. By the way, every person on earth has a friend. You find a minister has someone who cuts them hair and they tell them a lot of secrets. They have drivers, they have secretaries, they have friends. Now, let me begin with the NPA and Makerere University example. One, when policymakers are invited to participate in studies, it is one entry point, one big entry point. National Planning Authority, particularly myself, I have received a lot of invitations from Makerere University, particularly, and a few others. And so, and these have been persistent. Now, as a policymaker, it would be shameful to turn down invitations from these institutions persistently. You will get ashamed unless you don't have a heart. The moment a policymaker honors an invitation, that is your entry into that institution. Use that policymaker to access other policymakers within that institution. So keep inviting business executives, a lot of them are so much willing because they take it as a privilege. How many people have the privilege of speaking to people in Makerere, in Busitema, in Kabale? How many? So they take it as a privilege, but for you don't know. Keep inviting them. Write to policymakers through their executives or through their permanent secretaries. But sometimes you may need to first have a cold calling on them to interest them in what you're doing, tell them what you're doing, ask for an opportunity to meet with them, just to tell them what you are doing. But to attract a policymaker, you need to tailor your communication in such a way that what you are doing is of benefit to the work that the policymaker is doing or to the work of the private sector person. You are saying that I'm working on this project and it is aimed at increasing this and that, and this is the area you're working in. So the moment I see that you are trying to solve a problem that is giving me sleepless nights, I will be a fool not to invite you. I will be a fool not to respond to your call. So that is very critical. But I'm not saying that all that you need to do is to meet policymakers. There are so many influential people that may not be policymakers that you may need to as well meet. But also the vulnerable communities. These ones do not even need any kind of writer. You just need to go through the protocols and then engage with them. There is an issue of press release versus policy brief. Now, a policy brief is, I would say, it demands action, but also it's coming from a study in most cases, and it has evidence, and it demands action, and it is targeted mainly to a policymaker. A press release is targeted to whom it may concern. You put information out in the press, it may require action, but not specifically from anyone. Sometimes you may lay out information from what you studied, or you lay out information of your thoughts, which may not be really evidence-based. And a policy brief is quite structured. With a press release, you are just saying, this is what is coming from National Planning Authority on a particular issue. I will share the presentation with NEMRA, and you will liaise with her. Scholar brought up a very critical issue of practice being the key to whatever we are doing. We can hold a lot of seminars, but as long as you don't just do it yourself, you may not learn anything much. John Baptist brought up an issue here that we are focusing so much on after research. How about before research? In fact, it's a mistake if that is what has been projected, but I would say that it's very, very key to integrate right from the start how you can keep communicating whatever you're doing, either in the press, with your peers, with the academic society, or seeking audience with institutions like National Planning Authority to tell them about what you're doing. Don't wait for the end of your PhD to start that. It's very, very dangerous, very dangerous. And I want to encourage you, we are putting up a lot of platforms at National Planning Authority, and we are encouraging government agencies as well to do the same. As we talk now, we've just gotten a slight setback, but we were going to start rolling out the PhD fellowships and the academic staff sabbaticals at National Planning Authority, where students who are particularly towards the end of their PhDs or early career researchers, they could take off some time and come to National Planning Authority and spend a few months just to see how what they were doing and thinking intersects with the reality. It could be in development, it could be in medicine, it could be in different kind of things. But we are looking at providing a platform where the academia would meet with practice, such that the academic leaves National Planning Authority when it's a little bit balanced. It says, okay, this is how I've been thinking about this, but the interactions I've had with the different practitioners, the think tanking I've engaged in with National Planning Authority makes me believe that the better option is this and that. And the way these PhD fellowships are going to work is such a way that we are negotiating with the UN such that the person will not necessarily spend all the time at National Planning Authority, but National Planning Authority will be the conduit under my department, which schedules where the PhDs or university academic staff goes. And mostly UN agencies will be participants in this. The budget cuts have a little bit delayed our program, but we are still negotiating with development partners. And at an opportune time, we'll be informing Lois and her friends about it. But it's a very exciting thing because a university academic as well can seek leave of the university and come to spend some time at the at National Planning Authority to reflect, think tank, and see a meeting point between reality, the practice, and the academy. So these are opportunities that you should keep a keen eye on when they come up. But also, we at National Planning Authority have another kind of entry point for researchers, for the policymakers to have, to see your work. We are the Secretariat for the Presidential Economic Council, which prepares PEC papers, Presidential Economic Council papers, that come from research and have a key policy bearing. Papers which we see that they have a very critical contribution and they require a certain policy or to be in place, or they require a certain policy to be revised or a certain law. We will translate it into a PEC paper and then we submit it to the cabinet secretariat. And then the cabinet secretariat will schedule meeting for the Presidential Economic Council. After that, that paper will proceed to cabinet, and then cabinet will pronounce itself on the policy options there. And then if it requires a law, it will go to parliament. So there is that option there as well. We do have sessions where we do think tanking, that is Wednesdays, and the researchers can request to make presentations to the technical staff of National Planning Authority, such that we can hear your views and as well give you our informed views about it. So that is another kind of avenue that you can keep thinking about. But in a nutshell, I'm saying don't wait for the policymaker to come to you. You poke on them, you knock at their doors, you write to them through your institutions. You may be, sometimes some people have ego, which I don't believe is a good thing. But where you think that someone may not respond to you, use your institution to write. Like Lois, I got to know Lois through a friend, and they wrote to the institution using the institution they're in. And institutions always respond to institutions faster than individuals. So if you're a student, use your university. If you are in a certain institution, use your institution to write to the institution. The policymaker will respond faster. But also knowing the people that policymakers hang out with, if you fear the policymaker themselves, you can still use them as the gatekeepers. Try to make known what you are studying or what you are doing to the policymaker and show how it is going to solve some of the issues that the policymaker is baffled with. It increases the chances of you being listened. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Mugendawala, for that. And members, I also wish to thank you for your participation and for your engagement. I don't see any other question on the chat. We are coming to close to 11:30, and I think we should bring this to a close. So this is how I would suggest that we do it. We give a minute to Dr. Mugendawala to have his final remark, final word. And then after that, Lois, please take over and tell us how we will access this presentation, but also how we can be part of the NEMRA network. How do we join NEMRA and continue the engagement, such engagements? But also, you've mentioned on the chat some of the take homes that you have picked. Maybe you would like to give us a way forward on how we are going to take it up from here. And then the last one is I request that you, after your 1-2 minutes, you invite Dr. Christine Charity Mwevesa, the board member at NEMRA, to officially bring this to a close and send us off for our weekend, for our head of fish and probably 2 bottles of soda. Thank you. So Dr. Mugendawala, just a final word in a minute.
Okay, thank you very much. And I just promise that National Planning Authority is here for you. You keep informing us of what you're doing, and we will also keep informing you of what we are doing. We want to grow the intersectionality between the academy and practice, because that's the only way to go. And I want to urge training institutions to treat the issue of intersection and integration of the academy into practice and the community as the best way to go to make our PhD candidates and even academic staff more impactful. I want you to treat the issue of engagement as a key milestone for any PhD students. We should not be just looking at them as people who should be just producing academic papers, but universities should require and ask PhD candidates on how impactful they are. Impact does not mean that you came up with a completely new thing that like Facebook, WhatsApp. No, impact can take different metrics. But the issue here is you, the PhD candidate and the researcher, engaging significantly with the community. And as I've told you, at NPA, we are thinking as much as possible to create platforms for you, and it will be you to keep your eyes and ears to the ground. I'm so honored again. I've taken some time out of the classroom, but I hope to come back to the classroom because there are some universities that are asking me to do visiting lecturership, and as a way of increasing the glue between the academy and the practice. And I think it will be a great opportunity for me as well. Thank you very much, Lois, and a nice weekend.
Thank you, Dr. Hamis. We are very grateful for your sacrifice to come and talk to us about this important topic. And as you already know, we are people from different universities. So that makes us really diverse. We are from different universities, government institutions, as well as private institutions. So we have people who are academic researchers and practitioners on the call. And so you've been talking to a very wide audience. And I would like maybe to the participants to say thank you. Christine will be coming on to thank all of you, but I want to say thank you. And for those who are not yet registered as NEMRA members, I think you'll have information from Hadija or Vincent Sechtoreko, and you may consider to be inside this family of an inter-university network of everybody interested in research for and about Africa. And at this point, I would like to invite Dr. Christine Mugebesa, who is a member of the board for NEMRA, to extend a vote of thanks and indeed close this session.
Oh, thank you so much, Lloyd. Thank you so much, Dr. Hamisi. This was a really great piece, I would say, because indeed there's always a grappling between how the academics should relate and interact with the private sector or with the public. And you brought it out so well, because we can do research and do a lot, but how you share relevant information to different audiences sometimes becomes a hurdle. But the way you brought it out was so clear, and I believe all the participants agree with me that it was worth it. Thank you so much for loving NEMRA. Yes, I know as NPA, but I think we share a special bond with you, Dr. Hamis, because you've been there for us every moment we need you. Every moment we call upon you, you've always showed up. So we are so grateful for being available whenever we call and reach out to you. Thank you, participants. Thank you so much for responding to the call, and I believe you have not been disappointed. Like all the other members have said and shared, please, if you're not yet a member of NEMRA, subscribe, because there's a lot in store for all of us, but you can only benefit fully if you're really a NEMRA fully subscribed member. There's a lot you miss if you are not fully subscribed. Thank you, moderator John Baptist. That was a great work. We always look forward when you're moderating, because you bring out the life, and it is not really robotic. You completely mix up with the participant and the participants, the presenters, the material. It's really live. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone who has made this happen. Thank you, Lloyd, for the bridges you're creating to between NEMRA and different institutions. We appreciate. And so on behalf of the board and on behalf of our chair who did not make it today, I want to say thank you so much. God bless you. We look forward to more interactions together, Dr. Mugendawala, and especially the different platforms you have shared with us here regarding NPA. God bless you all, and have a blessed weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, and God bless you too.
Thank you very much, participants. Thank you, everybody. Have a blessed weekend.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do people want to share their videos and we see the faces? Anybody? We'll say hello to each other. Kaya, hi.
Hello.
Hello.
I could not afford to miss. It was so exciting. You've been my companion on the road today.
I hope we did not distract your driving.
Not at all.
Hi.
Good news.
Members, please mark your diary for the September seminar on the 4th, Saturday 4th. And have a nice weekend.
Thank
Same
you.
to
Nice
you.
weekend
And
to
you
you
too,
too.
Lois. Thank you. Have a nice time, all of you members.
Bye, people. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.